Good morning. I'm John Horan-Kates with the Vail Leadership Institute. This is a video book summary of Poke the Box by Seth Godin. Godin is a well-respected author, probably 10 or 12 books out there, writes for Fast Company, for the Harvard Business Review, and is the creator of a project called the Domino Project with Amazon that helps publish these marketing books. So Poke the Box, here's the cover, what it looks like. The subtitle is, When Was the Last Time You Did Something for the First Time? And so this is an interesting little book. It's pretty unusual, in part because I think Godin's pretty unusual, even wild. He uses the metaphor of a child poking a buzzer box to see what happens. He compares that child's curiosity to our ability to start new things in our businesses or in our organizations. He says life is a buzzer box, so poke it, see what happens, try new things. So Godin's book here is about taking the initiative to make something happen. Because the world, he says, is changing so rapidly, rather than waiting for instructions, we ought to step out and take the lead. We should instigate, he says. We should experiment rather than waiting to be shoved off the edge of a cliff. He promotes several imperatives in the book that are needed, I think, in this fast-paced world. They include being aware of market opportunities, being well-educated and well-connected, building something that you can sell, that you can ship, as he would say. And lastly, he says, have the guts, have the heart, have the passion to deliver that product, whatever that something might be. And so the essence of this book is simply to start a project and to complete it. So what we like to do in these book summaries is kind of organize it around kind of the key principle and then some of the key points that are made here. In this case, Godin's key principle is really about initiative. It's about taking action, about executing on those things that you say are important in this ever-changing world. This is a valuable leadership principle, initiative. Some of the key points or perspectives that he makes are that the box could be thought of as a computer, a market, a customer, maybe even your boss. It's a puzzle that can be solved by poking it, by trying new things. The box reveals itself through that process. He says that human nature needs a roadmap. And if you're brave enough to draw one, people might just follow you. He says that risk, to some people, is a bad thing because it brings the possibility of failure. Risk is avoided because in our culture we're trained to avoid failure. But avoiding failure actually is counterproductive. If you think about Thomas Edison and the number of times he tried to invent the light bulb, but the person who fails the most usually wins. He's trying a whole variety of things. Godin says that most of us are extremely adroit at hiding our fear, and that fear is almost always the source of our doubts. We'll take the initiative, however, when the cost of being wrong is less than the cost of doing nothing. It's an interesting point. He says also that the best way to become an insider, a leader, someone who matters in an organization, is to initiate. He says that initiating is scarce and therefore it's valuable. He also says that excellence isn't about working harder to do what you're told. It's about taking the initiative to do the work that you decide is worth doing. So we also like in these summaries to identify a few of the leading practices or applications that the author is advocating. Here are a couple from Godin. He says, talk about what you're afraid of. Get it out among trusted advisors. Secondly, he says, keep starting until you finish something. He says, be the promoter rather than the organizer. Really be the owner rather than the employee. Be the picker rather than just simply being picked. And of course he says, try something new, attempt something new. A couple definitions that might be important as you think about reading this book. He talks about poking as taking action and responding to what happens. He has a great definition for anxiety. He says that's experiencing failure in advance. And lastly, his definition of entrepreneurship is it's a process that requires initiating, involving money, people, and assets that really create something new. So as you consider these principles and practices, here are a couple questions that you might entertain in dialogue in your small group. What fear holds you back from moving on that idea that you've been thinking about for years? Can you name that idea? Are you willing to talk about it? Consider that question. Secondly, in your organization, what does innovation come from? Where does it come from? And lastly, if you had a chance to do a TED Talk, what would it be about? What have you discovered? What do you know that you could teach? These are things that you're capable of initiating on. So in conclusion, I think Godin makes a strong case that a new organizational system is evolving in our culture that doesn't consume oil or electricity or something on an assembly line. It thrives on innovation. It's a new system. He calls it a project line. He posits that merely starting a project without finishing it is just boasting. He says, and I quote him here, "I have no patience at all for people who believe they're doing their best work, but hiding it from the market. If you don't ship, you actually haven't started anything at all. If you keep the idea inside of you, you are merely hypothetically shipping, conceptually testing the market, prototyping your concept. If you don't finish, it doesn't really count as starting. And if you don't start, you're not poking." So in conclusion, again, I think some people hesitate when they should be starting. We tend to hold back. We promise to do a little bit more research, maybe waiting for a better moment. The purpose of this book is not to extinguish that fear that you might have. It's to call that fear's bluff. Identifying that fear, he says, of starting is the first step on the road to making the fear go away. So if you can embrace the idea that your success and your happiness are tied up in defeating that fear that's holding you back, then you're 90% of the way to where you need to be. So that's our summary of Poke the Box. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, pass it on to some friends and colleagues. Thank you.